Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 21 of From the Van. It's a podcast from my van, where I have conversations with people who have relationships with residential vehicles. Ladies and gentlemen, today on the podcast, I have Larry Balma. Larry Balma is probably responsible for one of the very most important technological improvements that facilitated modern-day skateboarding. Tracker Trucks, which is his company, made skateboard trucks that basically made it possible to haul ass downhill and made them durable enough for trick skating. And it's a wonderful conversation that we had. He does have a camper, but when I have an opportunity, to interview somebody this legendary, I'm going to take it whether there's much of a van life nexus or not. We had a wonderful conversation about risk, about life, about entrepreneurship, and about tinkering and inventing and stuff. Really look up to this guy, and we got along swimmingly right off the bat. Hope that you enjoy this episode of From the Van. Always remember to go over to FromTheVan.com and subscribe to the YouTube channel and the podcast and all of that. A bunch of dumb stuff happening over here, and I'm having a good time. Hopefully you are too. Enjoy episode number 21 of From the Van, featuring Larry Balma. There we go. Larry Balma, welcome to the van.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Your place is rad, man. I'm super into this spot. So let's talk about surfing.
Sure.
Why'd you make skate trucks?
Well, skate trucks basically so that they could get the feeling of surfing when we weren't at the beach or there was no surf or something. And it's a gravity sport. It doesn't move like a wave moves, but you find ditches and work them back and forth, and Now we build ramps and even skate parks.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Alhambra, San Gabriel Valley, next to East LA.
And what, man, that's that plank of wood with the metal wheels on it like really tripped me out. Like, where was skating when you started?
Well, okay, when I was a little kid, I had a scooter, and it was common since the 20s to build these scooters, and you'd take a roller skate, especially the roller skates they made for the street because they were the cheapest ones that were clamped onto your shoes, and you put half of it on the front of a 2x4 and half of it on the back, and then take an apple box, or we used orange crates because they were a little taller, and put a handle on it, and you had a scooter without buying one that was manufactured and cost money. I mean, everybody was into DIY, right? And in 1947, Peter Parkin, part of the Wind and Sea Surf Club, built a skateboard with the metal skates, but without the box on there. And he would come down Nautilus Street, which is a really steep-ass street in La Jolla, but it comes all the way down to Wind and Sea, and he would carry his surfboard, which was a longboard at the time, carry his surfboards, ride down the beach, and then all the guys that hung out at the beach there would take turns riding a skateboard around, and that was, that's as far as we can go back and figure. That was the first one. And there's, I mean, when we made ours, Tracker Trucks, the name came because train cars have trucks on front and back. The truck is the part that holds wheels to a hand truck or any kind of a thing that's moving, right? Well, trains had ones that turned like skateboards, even though they were being pulled, but that's what they did. And when the urethane wheels came out, and we were skating up at La Costa, I was living in Leucadia at the time, and we would ride those hills because the Teamsters Pension Fund built La Costa, and they built all these streets, but basically they had their hotel spa thing there, and they didn't have any houses anywhere. And so we all had little pickup trucks, and we would take turns driving, and it'd just be like a ski lift.
Right.
Going to the top of the hill and riding again. And since there were no houses and a lot of these streets were dead-ended at that time, nobody drove through there. There was no reason to, so skateboards was the only thing on the hills.
Go in there, yeah.
And there'd be this thin layer of dust because it's still all dirt. Even though it's graded, it's still all dirt everywhere. And so you get this little thin layer of dust. And when you skated down it, the wheels would blow the dust out of the way, and you'd have these tracks because we're like slalom riding down the hills, right? And so we ended up with tracker trucks.
Right on. That's awesome. And those were probably like really creamy, like smooth streets because
brand new,
nobody's driving them.
Yeah. You know,
when I lived in
union labor.
When I lived in Orange County, I was going to law school in Costa Mesa, and I would drive down to Laguna Beach for the same reason, because it's like rich neighborhood with a bunch of hills and like perfectly groomed asphalt and stuff. So what was
when we started with those metal wheels though that you saw, those were the cheap skates at the time. We'd put them on, make our skateboard, and if you rode on the asphalt, because all the asphalt streets were rough, it would just wear out the wheels. I mean, really fast.
Yeah.
We rode on the sidewalks or on driveways that were concreted. I mean, the smoother, the better, you know.
I just can't even imagine what it would be like to ride one of those things. You get speed wobble at like 6 miles an hour, or?
No. You didn't get going that fast because the wheels are small diameter. They're hard, and you know there's no give to them. Like the urethane has some give, even though you get a real hard urethane wheel, it still has a little bit of give, and you can slide it and control it. Those steel wheels you couldn't slide. You were gone if you got leaned over too far. So you know it definitely wasn't skating like skating is today, but. What I did is I went, you know, I was making money any way I could, you know. I was mowing yards and all this stuff. And everybody's garage, look at my barns out here, they're full of crap, right? And so I went to these ladies and I'd say, I'll clean your garage for $5. And they'd say, sure, yeah, my husband won't ever do that, you know. And so I would clean everything up. I'd throw away everything that I knew was really trash, and then I'd put a pile of stuff that, do you want to toss this or do you want to keep it? And I would always have a pile of roller skates because everybody's garage, they always bought them for their kids, and then they get a bigger size for their kids. So I would have a whole pile of skates there, and I said, do you want to have these skates anymore? And so I got paid $5 for cleaning garages, and I got an endless supply of steel-wheeled skates. And I had enough that supported me and my friends for years there until the next step was the clay composite wheel. It was clay and some kind of plastic that held it together.
Right. And then, but the next huge leap before the truck, right, or the updated truck was the polyurethane wheel, right?
Right. And they were made basically for training wheels for the roller rinks.
Okay.
Because they wouldn't go as fast as the harder composite wheels that they were making. And so they could teach kids how to skate with these things. And Frank Nasworthy was an Encinitas guy. He went back east to school, ultimately became an aeronautical engineer, but he was back east at school, and one of his buddies, they went on a road trip and visited this guy's uncle, and the guy's uncle worked at Quality Urethane back there, and they're going through looking at all the machines and all the stuff they're doing, and here's a 50-gallon drum full of wheels. Oh, what are these? You know, and it's, wow, we never had these on our skateboards.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we make those for the roller rinks. Those are all rejects. And so he would get as many as he could carry, come back and visit Encinitas, and you know, and he was a surfer, so all the guys got wheels, and that was the beginning of it.
Okay. And then I assume that the wheels sort of drove the need for a better truck. Is that how it worked?
Yeah.
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 And
the first day I rode on them, it was like, oh my God, you know, these wheels are just insane.
Because you're still on a super narrow truck. How does it operate in terms of its angle?
Well, the angles,
flex.
Yeah, the angles are very similar to what we do today, and they're low center of gravity, so they worked pretty good and less chance of wheel wobble and all that stuff. But the thing is with the steel wheels, they would slide out from under you right away. With the clay wheels, you know, if you're on a smooth surface, riding on a sidewalk smooth surface, or like we'd go to shopping malls at night and all this stuff, real glassy, a big grain of sand would stop your wheel dead, and you would fall and skin yourself up, you know. And I guess the smoother the surface, the easier it was. When you did it on the street, you hamburgered.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, here's these urethane wheels that are softer and had some give. The first thing is they're quiet. They weren't making all the noise that gets people going, what
the hell's going on? Yeah.
But they would roll over. They would even roll over a piece of gravel, and you wouldn't fall. It didn't stop the wheel. The wheel, you know, just kept going. So it was the polar shift in even thinking about skating the streets or anything. But right away, I mean, the first day I rode it, I go, God, first thing, we need better bearings, because the bearings were loose ball, and you had to adjust the bearing races, because the bearings would get dirt in there and they would wear smaller, and you had to keep adjusting the races, or all of a sudden you'd see a bearing pop out while you're riding, right? You're skating down the hill and going like hell, and all of a sudden the bearing pops out, and another bearing, and then it seizes up.
And then you're on the street. Wow.
So, but anyways, yeah, and then, you know, we need some wider trucks. I mean, you can see my first skateboard was on a 2x8. Everybody else had 2x4s, but I wanted the wider one. Your feet fit on it better, you know. And my dad had this redwood. He was making window sashes for our mountain cabin, and so that redwood made it. It was behind my house, under the fig tree, buried about this deep, and it just got a little bit of rot on one end of it, and that's it. It's still there.
Yeah. It looks good. I don't want to ride it, but so what led you to start working on a new truck, a different truck?
Well, you know, we came back. I had an office in my house in Leucadia. I lived on a property.
What were you doing for a living at the time?
Well, I was a commercial fisherman.
Okay.
That was my living. And that first day, I mean, I had a skateboard. I had skateboards left from, you know, I started riding a skateboard in '58, and this was in probably 1971 when I moved up to Leucadia. And that's when, you know, we discovered the urethane wheel. So I had skateboards, but, you know, and maybe I'd ride down, when I used to live in Pacific Beach, I'd ride the skateboard down to the beach sometimes, but we didn't ride like we did when I was, you know, in my teens. But the skateboards were still there. So these guys come over to my house, and I don't remember if I was patching nets or fixing lobster traps or something in the front of the house. And they said, come on, we're going skating, you know, we're going skateboarding, you know. I said, well, no, you got to try these new wheels. So we went up to La Costa, and after that, we came back to my place, and everybody came back to the office, and we're having a happy hour there and telling stories and all that stuff. Had a whole group of guys, and I said, God, this is really cool, but we need some real bearings in these wheels, and God, we should have wider trucks, and wider boards, to really take advantage of this. And we had a little discussion about it, and I'm opening up my catalogs and seeing how much bearings cost and guessing at other stuff, because I'd been a machinist already, and I knew how to build stuff, and I had a small machine shop at my place there, and I had a place in San Diego. The guy had let me use his shop anytime I wanted, and so we thought about it, and I'm looking at the numbers and everything, and I don't know anything about profit margins or costs of doing business, anything. And so I say, well, to make a board like that, it probably costs $30. Nobody'd ever paid $30 for a skateboard. And we kept on skating and fooling around, and a year later, I got the same group of guys together, and I said, hey, Billy Bain made 100,000 skateboards last year at $30 a piece. He sold them for half of that, but the stores got $30 a piece. I said, maybe we ought to take another look at this. And so one of my friends, Dave Dominy, was all into it, and none of the others really wanted to commit to stuff, but they were going to go along and help out where they could. And so I started working with Dave, and we tried all the different roller skate trucks we could, and I started putting longer axles in the roller skate trucks and figuring out how they're made, and it's just, and being a machinist and all this stuff. And then on the boats I was engineer, and I knew hydraulics and welding and all this stuff, and we had all this aircraft industry in San Diego, and I could go into Roar Aircraft on Saturday and buy parts they were getting rid of and stuff, and so I knew from machining and everything all the different materials and the strengths of them, and so we built a truck based on all aircraft quality parts and lock nuts and all this stuff, because the hard parts of the roller skates was adjusting them. Nobody knew how to adjust them right. Well, some people did, but it
needed to be an expert.
It needed to be foolproof, right. And we changed it. We did a solid kingpin on the thing. We made them easier to work on and assemble, and made them out of strong materials, and ended up changing the industry ultimately.
What did you do for the bearing at first? Were there bearings on the market that did what you wanted them to do?
I was machining wheels, going down to my friend's machine shop, and I would machine out wheels and press in precision bearings, precision ball bearings. And they were expensive, and the ones I was using were large. It was an R8, and now they're using a 308, and it was all about the price of them. But our bearings, we were, our guys were winning the slalom contests halfway because they had our trucks, which were easy to control, but because they had the bearings in there that really spun good.
Yeah. Crazy. And so what happens then? You make a skateboard that you can abuse and maneuver unlike you've been able to do before. And is everybody jumping on the bandwagon to copy that, like basically immediately?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Larry Gordon was making the Fiberflex boards, and they worked real good in slalom and everything. But you kind of, when we were riding ditches and the reservoirs on the farms out here and stuff, the hard surf boards were or skateboards were better. And so we used his technology of laminating, but just experimented with wood, together with Ken Watson, he was in, well, I guess he was out of high school at that point. But I built a press down at his property in Pacific Beach, and we were gluing together different kinds of woods till we got it figured out, and then the whole thing exploded, after because you could mold shapes into the boards, and we were molding a kicktail into the laminated board.
Right. To what degree is all of this, as the board changes shape, because I was born in 80, and I've seen the skateboard change shape, and all the stuff that we're talking about right now happened before I was born, right? As the board is changing shape, to what degree is that being influenced by surfing? Because I know that now you've got a concavity in the deck of a skateboard that only a couple of companies have even experimented with putting in the top of a surfboard, right? The top of a surfboard is still convex, basically, right? For most boards. And you need the concavity in the top of a skateboard now to do all the flip tricks and shit that people are doing. But that wasn't even, I think about like a Nash skateboard in like 85 or whatever. That was completely flat on the deck. How does that shift evolved in terms of the shape of the board? I mean, you talk about the kicktail, and that's existed since I was born, for sure.
And the kicktail, was pretty much, people were using that. Sometimes it was just a piece of wood at the back of the board so your foot didn't slide off the back, but it ended up working as a kicktail, and so that's been around for a long time. But it was probably in the 70s that the kicktail became a common thing. And Makaha skateboards made the first one that had pieces of metal that came back and a piece of wood bolted on it. It was pretty goofy. But I don't know. I mean, the skateboard went through changes just in the things we were doing, and you found out that a concave worked, that held your feet better. I mean, the surfboard is wide, so you got a lot of room to move around. But the skateboard, you pretty much, a longboard, you can walk on the board like a long surfboard or something, but it's the concave in the deck helps your feet position themselves. And then, we had, kicktails at the back, and we tried all different angles and all this stuff. And then ultimately they put a kicktail in the front of most of the new boards. The street boards all have it, and a lot of the pool boards have it too. And the kicktail in the front they've actually made longer than the one in the back, which, just enhances the ability to do certain tricks with it and stuff. But from day one with the skateboard, we were trying to emulate surfing. And then when we found the ditches and pipes and stuff, all of a sudden it's really like surfing, because as you go up, if it's a regular huge pipe, you go up and you get weightless. And that's when you get that real surf feeling, you're getting weightless, and and we're doing kick turns, and then all of a sudden we're doing airs and everything, and riding swimming pools and hitting that coping, which knocked us up and come back in. I mean, just incredible stuff that you couldn't do on a surfboard. And it finally got to the 90s where Herbie Fletcher's kids were trying to do airs on surfboards, and they were the first ones that were doing aerial maneuvers and actually landing them. And now it's like, if you're going to be at the top tier of the ladder, you better be doing some aerials, right. Or you're not going to stay there, So, it's finally, skateboarding took from surfing, and we got bigger than surfing because surfing has to be done on the coast. Now they're doing some wave parks and stuff, but so skateboarding got huger, and which there's different factions that either like or don't like skateboards. For the most part, we're together. But all of a sudden, skating was giving back to surfing because they were able to do tricks, and the names cross over, and it's pretty cool stuff. And in the process, there is that snowboarding came along the same way. So we've got board sports. Snowboarding is different to do because I never skied or anything, and being a skateboard and surfer, you have all your weight on the rear a lot. And on the snowboard, if you have your weight on the rear, you have a hard hit on your butt all the time. And you have to learn to lean forward, which skiers already know that. They're leaning forward to go, and that's what allows them to turn and everything. And like for somebody like me, that was hard. God, you lean forward, that makes you go faster and you get more scared right away. But if you lean forward,
you can actually engage the edge.
You can engage the edge, and you can do your turns and do everything. That's what makes it work. So it's different in that aspect, but otherwise it's very similar. A lot of the same feeling.
The other thing, when you say you have to surf on the coast, and that we have wave pools and stuff, but one of the things that strikes me as so different about skating versus surfing is that as long as it's not raining, which it never is in Southern California, you can always skate the same obstacle over and over and over again, whereas the ocean changes, right? And the wave pools are going to enable people in Idaho to surf, but they're also going to enable surfers to have the exact same ramp every time, right? I feel like that's one of the things that is different from the skate park and the ocean, is that you can try the same trick until you break your arm or get it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So when does hold on, let me restart this real quick. When does Transworld happen?
We did the first issue of Transworld came out May '83.
Okay.
And Surfer Publications made Skateboarder magazine. They made 4 issues in the 60s, I guess, and then skating goes through these ups and downs, and they quit doing the magazine, and then in the 70s, and maybe, I don't know, 74 or 75 was their first issue for Skateboarder again from Surfer Publications, and they did, phenomenal magazine, and a whole bunch of other magazines came out at the same time on skating. But Surfer went all the way to 1980, I think. It might have been 81 that they did their last issue. I'm not sure, right around there. And they had changed the magazine to be called Action Now because BMX Bike was coming on at that time, taking participants away from skateboarding. Skate parks that were there were getting closed down because the land was basically purchased to in that inflationary period to make money and build an office building or something on. They said it was all insurance problems, but it was really about making money off the land, and they put a skate park on there because somebody could pay the taxes while the thing was increasing in value. So anyways, Skateboarder changed to Action Now, and it didn't work for them. I mean, they had the other thing was the rollerblading that was coming on with the disco scene, and I don't know, that pretty much bummed out all the skaters, and especially the companies, because we're paying for the ads. There wasn't BMX Bike, paying for the ads in it. They were just getting a free ride, and so that went away. And Thrasher magazine started in '81, and that was a total, like a newspaper, tabloid size newsprint. And after the first, I don't know, year and a half or two, they started making it magazine size, but it was still newsprint. And they were focused on San Francisco because it's competing companies with all the down south companies. And we had Del Mar Skate Park, which was a mecca because everything else closed, and Del Mar was a mecca for skateboarders everywhere. I mean, probably you back home in North Carolina, you probably...
The one that stuck out to me was the YMCA in Encinitas. That's the one that I knew about, and this is in the '90s, right?
Oh, okay,
yeah. Because I was a baby in the '80s.
That's right. Yeah.
So the one that I always saw everybody skating was the Y in Encinitas. I knew about that before I even knew where Encinitas was.
Okay.
Well, let's get back to Trends World in a second, because it's been influential in a bunch of different board sports and stuff. But I asked you a question earlier, and then I stopped you from answering it, and I'm super fascinated by this. I grew up in just south of North Carolina, in Conway, South Carolina, and I had to drive 2.5 hours to get to the closest skate park when I was a kid, and it cost like $10 or $20 to skate for the day. And the first time, even though I had a driver's license, the first time I went up there, I had to take my dad with me so that they could watch him fill out a waiver. And then this is whatever, 10 years later or something, I moved to California, and there's skate parks everywhere. They're free. There's no supervision. You can go over there and just crack your head open if you want. You don't have to wear, every once in a while the cops would come around and, like, if you weren't in a helmet, they'd chase you off or whatever. But I was like, this is amazing. This is heaven, like, why are we allowed to do this? So you had some hand in the liability conversation or something? How did that work?
Well, okay, so we've always had associations, manufacturers associations, and they've changed over the years. But the IASC Association that we started up in the 90s, International Association of Skateboard Companies, we started working on how can we get skate parks back, because they had come and gone again.
Right.
And we'd gotten into guys building their own ramps, and there's that whole thing going on. There's a need for skate parks. And so what we found out is that if the sport was considered a hazardous activity, you couldn't sue somebody because you got hurt doing it, because you accepted the fact that you were doing a hazardous activity, because it's on this list of hazardous activities. So all we got to do is get skateboarding to be a hazardous activity, right? We know it is already.
Right.
So anyways, Jim Fitzpatrick, he lives in Santa Barbara. He was president of a Montessori school, and he worked for George Powell, doing trade show stuff and all kinds of things. Real creative group of people between Stacy and Craig Stesick and Jim. Anyways, so Jim is researching this, and he's figuring out how we go about to get a law passed that we're hazardous activity, because obviously we are. And we bought him a suit and tie. And, we had all this research that we did about it, and he goes up to Congress in Sacramento and goes in there and stands up and says, he wants to get somebody to put a bill in to, make skateboarding a hazardous activity, because all these kids want to skate. We need to have skate parks, and this way municipal cities would be able to build skate parks, and nobody could sue for something happening, and this is a big deal. Okay. Well, so after this is over, a couple of the congressmen came and followed him out into the hallway, and they said, I said, you see the guy that sits at that desk up there that you were speaking to? Well, he's also the president of the Trial Lawyers Association. And the way this thing works is almost everybody in this place that's a congressman is also a lawyer of some kind or another. And we don't want to lose our ability to be able to sue over something. I mean, this is not going to work. He says the only way this will ever happen is if we get worried enough that so many people want this to happen that they're going to vote for somebody else, then we'll go ahead and vote for it. But he goes, I don't know, good luck on ever getting that figured out, but that's what's going on here. You're wasting your time. So, okay, we come back from this, lick our wounds, say, okay, how are we going to do this? Well, we had the Castle Amateur Series going on in California. We had, the Pro Series stuff going on, different areas, all this stuff. And we're dealing with all these skaters. Every company has a lot of skaters that they're sponsoring and all this stuff. And so we put on a push to get letters written that said, God, our kids need a place to skate. They used to have this place, but that got torn down. Our friends had ramps in their backyard, but the neighbors don't like it, and all this stuff, right? And so we collected letters for a year. Petition, sign the petition, send in the letters, all this stuff. And I don't know if you've ever been in the back of a post office, but they've got these sacks that are about this big that they put all the letters in and everything. So we get some of those sacks, a bunch of those sacks. And we fill them all up with letters, and we get this whole thing, okay, it's choreographed, we're going to do it. And at the time, Transworld had bought... what's that magazine up in Sacramento? It did skating in the summer and snowboarding in the winter. Heckler magazine. And those guys' jobs, that they made money at, and with the magazine being their passion, they made something off it. But their day jobs were riding bicycles through the city, delivering papers. This is before internet stuff, right. Very much, and at the beginning of it, and stuff had to be signed, and they wouldn't go for a signature that you didn't, all that. And so they're delivering stuff to all these different lawyers and to the thing, and they knew how the city worked. And so anyways, and we knew, when they had the meetings and all this stuff. And so the day that we went up there to have the meeting, we hired a dump truck. And we filled the dump truck with sacks of letters.
That's so badass, dude.
This is so skating, right? Yeah. And so we backed the dump truck up to the steps of the Capitol building and dumped all these letters on the thing. And then Jim Fitzpatrick comes in with 2 of these bags, and he goes up and he dumps one out on the table of the guy that's sitting up there, that's the president of the trial lawyers, and all this stuff, and goes through our speech of this is, we've got to do this. And by God, they voted to make skateboarding a hazardous activity. And those guys told us that there would never, ever be another hazardous activity, because the last one they did was in 1961, and that was skiing.
Huh.
And they would never do another one. Wow. Well, they did skateboarding, and then skate parks started, flourishing. And we've put all our words out to the rest of the country of how we've done this. Yeah. And, there's skate parks all over.
It's coming. There are skate parks in where I grew up now. There just weren't when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And they're still not as plentiful because it's not as popular there.
And that was in 96.
Yeah.
When that finally got passed.
That's so cool. The industry basically called itself out and shot itself in the foot to make itself more accessible. That's so cool.
I know. That sounds backwards.
I love that.
And so to begin with, it's thinking outside the box, right? Which skaters aren't afraid to try some new trick. They're always trying to, shit, this should be possible, know? And we're risk takers anyways, because how many times you fall down before you learn a trick? It's not an easy deal. And we get a little help from the guys saying, they were telling us that you can never do this, right. But they were really telling us how we're going to do this. Right. Or we figured out, this is how we should approach it.
Anyways. Man, I love that story. That's super cool. So let's go back to Transworld for a minute, because I mean, it ended up being not just a skate magazine, but also a surf magazine. And how did that sort of develop? You started it in '83, you said?
Started in '83, and I mean, I didn't know the difference between a sheet-fed press and a web press. I knew nothing about it, and we printed the magazine at a company in Carlsbad that actually got a small web press, and for their own products, they made products for medical thing. Their first invention was probably the stretcher that the wheels would fold up in, where you could push it into the ambulance without having to lift it all the time. And then they made just stuff for police and you know, all the emergency services and all this stuff. And they did the magazine, or got the press to put together their own catalogs and stuff. And they had their whole system there. They had what's called the stripping part of it, because when we started the magazine, there was no computer programs that you could do a magazine on. I mean, you figured out the type that you were going to use. You'd write your stories. You'd send that to a typesetter that you'd say, this is the font we want. We want this big. We want this big, and they would photograph all this stuff, and then we would paste these photographs on these art boards, which were basically a 2-page spread, or if you're doing an ad, it's only the 1 page you're working on. But I mean, you'd end up with all these different stacks of paper and tissue paper over it with images drawn of how the picture is going to go. And then it goes into the strippers, and the strippers take this artwork and they're photographing that, making negatives. And if it's full color, that's basically 4 colors. You got white paper to start with. You got black ink, blue ink, red ink, and yellow ink, and the mixture of those colors, because they're transparent, laying on top of each other, and they're little dots, and that gives you your 4 color. Your eyes see that as full color pictures. Well, so you'd think that would take 4 negatives, but it doesn't, because especially with the artwork that we did on the magazine, where you have pictures overlapping other pictures and type set in the things, you could use 45 sheets of film in order to do 1 page.
1 page. Jeez, that seems so inefficient.
And these sheets of film now, well, they're doing more than 1 page at a time, but the sheet of paper is like 4 foot by,
right,
4 foot by shoot.
So what's the innovation that comes there?
Well, it's a computer.
Yeah.
And it took a long time. I mean, we started with computers, and I could lay out a page. I could lay out 3 or 4 pages in the time it'd take one of our guys to do 1 page on the Mac when it started. And then the computer just got better and better. And then we were printing in Denver, and I'm back there, and they're going, God, you got to come next door and look, there's this graphics place, you got to check this out. And we went in this graphics place, and here's this room that's about 30 feet square, and the whole thing is full of computers with reels running and all this stuff. And this guy sits down on the machine, and they take one of our or a couple of our slides and scan them, and they took the heads off of one guy and put the head on the other guy. And this was a Cytex machine. It was the only one in the country that, I don't know. I mean, just cost phenomenal amount of money for these guys to be able to do this. But that it was just steps like that happened, at an accelerated pace until, we got to where we are today. And nobody cuts film anymore. I mean, And all that film, I mean, it's got silver on it, right? You recycle a film, they wash the silver off and use it over again to make new film. But how expensive is that? God, it's crazy.
Yeah.
And time consuming. And speaking of Carolinas, Ray Underhill moved out here to come to Skate Mecca, right? And he was in North Carolina. And he moved out here. And he's a tracker, and you know there was a whole Mid-Eastern ramp series that went during the 80s back there, and a lot of these guys came out and worked for Tracker and Transworld and everything. And Ray comes out and he's seeing what we're doing with the magazine. He goes, "Well, my family, that's what we do. Is we're strippers, you know. I mean, they're in the printing industry." And so I took him up to our stripper, what was in Orange County, and they hired him on the spot. And I mean, they were bummed when he left to go be pro with Powell and go on the tour, but because he was the best employee they had ever had, and he knew everything. And the best part about it is he knew. See, when you go in to get something printed, skateboarding wasn't normal. They don't know whether the guy's regular foot or goofy foot.
Right.
They don't know if he's upside down or sideways, or, you know, what are you showing here? You know, we had to really, our communications, when the fax machine came out, our first fax machine costs, I paid distributor price. I signed up as a distributor. I had to buy, I think, 12 or 15 of these fax machines in order to get a distributor price, and that was $4,500 or $4,700 or something a piece. But boy, I sent them to the printer, and all the color strippers and artists that we, you know, it's just because we could fax stuff back and forth and see things, because again, there's no internet going on. Crazy. Went through a whole age of stuff, and I really enjoy learning stuff, you know, and get tuned in. Like, I mean, I used to go to the stripper at night and go in the back door because the place closed, and since they made police stuff and everything, they had security cameras and all that stuff, but the guys all liked me, and I'd go in there and I'm, okay, yeah, how do you do this? And I'm learning this whole process until somebody noticed me coming in on the security camera through the back door, and I got kicked out of there. But that was about the time we ended up taking the next step and moving to Denver and everything with the printing. So anyways,
it's kind of crazy to think about like all of the innovations that happened during the life of the magazine, and those innovations eventually are basically sort of what killed the magazine, right? You know, it's like the computer makes it so much more cost effective and so much faster to make the magazine, but then the internet eventually, the communication of the internet is what destroys the magazine.
Takes the customer away from buying the magazine.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's all on there. So, you are more or less quote unquote retired, but you've still got your hands in a bunch of shit. What are you doing now?
Well, I still work on the molds for Tracker and different production problems and stuff like that, but I've sold the company, and and I don't have to run any of that part of it. I still get around, especially to some of the old bro skate stuff, and still touch base with a lot of the old skaters, and they have some reunions every year, and Skateboard Hall of Fame. And anyways, but gosh, we give back, I've been giving back at the Surf Museum. I'm the head advisor down there, and Louise is on the board at the Surf Museum. She designed and built the building that we're in Oceanside. And we're also founders of the Surf Museum up in San Clemente.
Okay.
Surfing Heritage. And Louise is on the Planning Commission, and I'm the president of our association of farmers out here. And we work a ton of hours. You know, I mean, one of the biggest pluses that we've gotten in the last couple of years is that the city is working on a recycled water system that's going to come up here and be able to use to water our like we grow avocados and nursery palms here, but there's a lot of different crops that are grown out here. We're the last remaining agricultural area in Oceanside, which was mostly agriculture for a really long time. And we're just trying to save our lifestyle out here because we've got developers that would like to carve up our land into housing subdivisions.
More subdivisions, yeah. What about you guys? I don't know if it was you or Louise that mentioned this earlier, but I have a friend in Encinitas who's on the Traffic and Public Safety Commission with me. From my perspective, the most interesting story so far has been the sort of liability reform activism that you guys did, and in the changing landscape of Oceanside and stuff, one of my buddies is working on building what he calls an agri-hood, right? And so it's like a neighborhood that allows development but also maintains the farming aspect. Are you guys working on that sort of thing?
Is that out
here?
in
That's an Encinitas
Valley
thing.
Center? Oh, it's an Encinitas thing?
Yeah. Is that something that's on your radar in the
yeah,
neighborhood here,
we've
or?
gotten we call our thing agrivision.
Okay.
And it includes agri-hoods, agritourism, because the farming thing is changing so much, and all the regulations on farming and the raising of the minimum wage and demanding overtime hours. It's really hard for the farm laborers to make enough money if they can't have the overtime. But when you have to pay overtime, like you might work really long hours for 2 weeks and then not have any work for a week, and then it fluctuates. And the way our system always was, it worked with these things, and the guys could work as long as they wanted to and make money. But when you have to pay overtime for those hours, I mean, if they could say, okay, if it's over so many hours in a month, or
or a quarter,
or whatever, maybe it would work. But they're saying no, it's so many hours in a day and so many hours in a week. Well, farming is not. When there's work there, it has to be done at that time, or the food's going to be rotten. The flowers are going to die. They're going to miss, the Mother's Day. Whatever's happening. It's not like just a nut and bolt widget industry. It's different. But I don't know. It's politicians don't think through stuff. It gets back to the magazine deal, which they're going to think about how they get elected the next time and how they hire somebody to do their job, because they don't really need to work. They need to work on getting more money to get elected for the next term. And so they're not reading. They sign these bills that just, it sounds good. This other guy says, yeah, this is a good one. You sign this one and I'll sign yours. And that's the way our country is run. And it's when you're in a company, you got to figure out what's going to make you work and what's going to make you survive. Our countries don't do that. They just say, well, we'll print more money, and so you're always bankrupt, basically. You can't run a business like that.
Yeah. Did you fall into being an entrepreneur, or is this like somewhere that you were always headed? You seem very you have a huge appetite for learning shit, right? And it seems like you sort of like are always trying to figure the next thing out, like a skater, right? But did you expect this? Did you anticipate?
changing an industry?
I don't know. Well, no, I just take what's in front of me and go for it, I mean, it was, fishing was a real teacher. I mean, before that, growing up, like I said, I did lawns and stuff, I cleaned garages. I did whatever. I mean, I was making surfboards in 1960 for the boat shop that was in town. Mm-hmm. I would go there, they'd give me all the materials, and I had a guy that would glass for me, and we'd shape boards and but I was pulling things together and giving people work back then, even and I was always like that. I've always had probably 3 different jobs at a time, no matter what. And I went to work for the phone company, and I worked nights at Shakey's. And the phone company, I became a lineman, climbing poles and doing all this stuff. And I mean, that's a long story. But one thing, when I moved from San Gabriel Valley down to San Diego, I lived in Pacific Beach and worked for the phone company there. And I got into all the aircraft plants because we were always having to run wires or change something going through the plants. And so now I'm dropped into the whole machinery thing, I mean, my dad was, he was basically a finish carpenter but he worked on the cars growing up, and we built go-karts together, and I started airbrushing shirts when I was in high school. I mean, making big money because, I mean, I had to learn how to do it. And I went to a car show with my dad, and here's Big Daddy Ed Roth spraying T-shirts or sweatshirts with an airbrush. And I was just mesmerized by that. I stood there and watched it the whole time. That's all I could talk about. Drove home in that old pickup, Mm-hmm. And, my dad, he hears what I'm saying, and he goes, "Who's got an airbrush?" Mm-hmm. And he found a photographer that had an airbrush because they would use them to Photoshop mm-hmm. pictures, when you're doing
without Photoshop.
Yeah, without Photoshop, right? And so I started trying to figure out how to do it, and I'm walking down, going to the sporting goods store in Alhambra, and I go by the Downers men's store. And here's this kid sitting in front, airbrushing sweatshirts. And so I'm all over it, And he goes, "Well, come over to my house. I'm going to show you how this stuff works." He showed me how to use the inks, what inks to use, and, gave me the whole deal. And, and a month later he says, "Hey, I'm going off to college." And I talked to him here at Downers, and he brought me in and introduced me to the guy. He said, "This guy can paint shirts for you."
Yeah.
And so, the next weekend I'm sitting out on the sidewalk
doing his job,
spraying shirts.
Yeah.
But my mom said, well, she took me on the trolley, and we'd go downtown LA to the garment district mm-hmm. and buy sweatshirts wholesale. And so I'm painting those at home and selling them at school. And I mean, I was getting $250 a shirt to paint them for Downers, and I was probably making $450 a shirt, painting them and selling them myself, because you're making markup on the shirt too. And so it was just, I was kind of always in there, and I don't know, probably came from my grandfather on my mom's side, because he was an entrepreneur and a problem solver big time.
Yeah.
My dad was a craftsman, and here we go.
Just working on stuff. Are you still surfing?
Yeah.
Yeah? What are you riding now?
Longboards.
Yeah. What's your favorite surf spot? Where do you usually go?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, Oceanside here, different spots, but I like to go to San Onofre. We're going to be camping. I got a friend that's captain in the Navy, and so
you get the special site right next to the old man
church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never stayed in there. I've always looked in there, like, coveting it. I'm like, damn, dude.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Why'd you leave Encinitas? Like when I hear, oh, he innovated, he changed skateboarding, living right next to my favorite set of surf spots. I'm like, wow, that's crazy. And then, I mean, this place is beautiful, but why are you here?
Well,
What was that? Oh, my God.
oh, that's a book, jeez. Okay. So I was in Leucadia. I mean, I've bounced around a little bit in North County. I lived in Oceanside for a bit. I was remodeling my house in Leucadia, and then I ended up getting a divorce and stuff. But I pretty much stayed down there and in Encinitas, and even went inland a little bit, and then I got the house at Stone Steps. And when we started making some money, well, this is the second time around, because in the 70s we made a lot of money, and then everything went backwards, and bought out my partners and was huge in debt and everything, and then and then the skating started coming back. We made money, and I started the magazine, using everything I made to do the magazine. Had to go to a different bank because my bank would have never let me start a magazine. A lot of stories there. But anyway, so I ended up buying the house at Stone Steps, and then when I met Louise, her whole family's farmers.
Mm-hmm.
They came from northern Italy. Her grandfather's been farming California since 1906 or something. I mean, and her dad or brother still farms. All her cousins farm and everything. And it's just... So, anyways, come skating had another downturn, and I hired a guy that embezzled me into bankruptcy, and had to pretty much start over again with all the skating stuff, and I had my Harley. I'd ride my Harley around after work, and ride through Rancho Santa Fe and all that stuff. And I found this area up here that kind of looked like Rancho, but it didn't cost as much, And so we started with 4 acres here, and
Same property?
Yeah, same property, and then we bought, so now we're 15 with this piece. But all of a sudden, I could go to the family parties with Louise, and I could talk about, acre feet of water, and herbicides, and, farm problems or whatever. But, all of a sudden, because at the time, who was a skate guy,
Yeah. That's fine. Yeah. We're still rolling. Well, so that makes me wonder. When you say the word entrepreneur, it either sounds super romantic or hoity-toity, but there's also a dark side of it that you just sort of alluded to, which is risk. Can you talk a little bit about risk?
Well,
because, I mean,
I'm going to jump back to my commercial fishing days, because I said this was my business education, and so commercial fishing, you're going out in the ocean, which I love the ocean because I'm a surfer to start with. It was kind of hard fishing because a lot of the fishing times are when there's these great waves going on. But I saw waves everywhere. I mean, we tried to figure out how to ride waves at the Cortez Banks out there before anybody even dreamed of it, But anyways, I had a license to fish in Mexico too. And it's just... every day out there, you're risking your life, and you're risking your nets, and you're risking your boat. I mean, it's all risk, and and it's romantic, and it's exciting, and it's all those things that we get off of surfing and everything else. But you don't always catch fish. I mean, you gotta really work hard, and you have good days and bad days, and probably five really hard, rough days for every good day that you have when it boils down to it. And I decided, all of a sudden Tracker was going, and it's like I either had to do it or not do it, because I thought I could just set up. I set up machines. My partner Dave he was doing the promotion stuff, and he would run the shop and have the guys working, and I'm calling ship to shore, and how many trucks did we build? I mean, and everybody's hearing this. And what are these Tracker trucks? They think they're, big trucks or something. Crazy stuff. But I had to make a decision of what I was going to do. And my wife at the time said, our relationship sucks because you're never here. Well, it sucked really bad once I was there, but so it might not have been the best decision there, but it was. But the thing is, coming to work on the beach and do the company, you're not risking your life. You're only risking dollars and cents. I mean, it's like nothing. I already knew how to make, all the pieces to make good decisions on stuff, but in the end, you're only risking money, and so, I've been rich a few times and I've lost it all a few times. I mean, it's, in some ways, I guess it's like gambling, but in gambling, it's all based on luck. When you're making decisions on business, you're being logical about it. So, I don't know, did I answer that question?
What's the life advice that comes out of that? Just fucking do it, or what?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing is that you got to be a survivor. So how are you going to survive, and what's the best way to survive, and what's the easiest way, and what's your level of risk that you can handle? Mm-hmm. Give me the book here. I mean, you might pull something out of this, but it's this is an article that I wrote for our business journal, Transworld Business in Action Sports Industry. This is way too long, but I'm going to read it anyways. This is kind of like my garage. We built it at a trade show booth. This is back in '91, and it's an inspirational article. And when somebody gets this book, and and they've got young kids, it's like, have them read this page, because it's short. It's page 3, but it's an inspirational deal. Okay, so I titled it "Back to Roots." Being there, I would write something for everyone, and being there was, kind of taken from that movie, Peter Sellers movie way back when. But it's kind of like different things I'd done in my life, and I'd relate it somehow to business. So back to roots. I've always believed the garage is a special place. It's not where we park our cars, it's where we invent our dreams. As a sacred place, the garage rates right up there with the local church. And for some of us, it's an even more useful sanctuary. In the garage, you can play music as loud as you want. Get your hands dirty, let your body relax, set your mind free. Ever since I was a kid, the garage was where I dreamed, tinkered, and created. I'd build go-karts, motor scooters, or whatever, discovering the rush of engineering things at work. When you find something that is designed just right, you know it. You feel the fit, the function, the finesse. Like the 56 pickup I drove out of the showroom in with my dad. I raced it, hauled fish in it, showed off to the girls in it, and spent a lot of hours under the hood. I went from working on my pickup to making surfboards to designing skateboards, but the whole point has always been to build something that goes fast, looks good, and is capable of putting you in places that scare the hell out of you. Anyways, and I go on from there, but yeah, it's something that you do. So I've got to drive. I don't know why, but I'm not afraid to work hard.
Yeah.
I mean, look at you, all the stuff you're doing. This is, you're taking this path right now. You're going to do something, you're going to make it work, and you're going to either continue to do that or do the next thing or evolve it,
else.
you know?
Yeah. I was watching, have you seen Free Solo? The climbing movie? This dude climbed El Capitan with no ropes. And it's like a 3,000 foot climb and stuff. And it's the same thing that you were saying about the fishing. Is like, I finished watching that movie and my fucking palms are sweating the whole time I'm watching it. And I've been worried about, like, this is my whole house and I'm about to drive it to Chicago and I don't know Chicago and I'm going to park it and go into a class for 5 days. And I'm like, somebody's going to steal all my shit. But then I was like, this guy just, like, climbed up a rock face for 5 hours. And if he fucked up, he died. And if I lose all this stuff, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, going to the place is more important than preserving my things, you know? Yeah. So I guess.
Yeah, no, it's all relative. You know, the guys I sold my boat to went down with it. There were 3 boats.
Oh, wow.
2 guys on my boat, 3 guys on the next boat, and 5 guys on the 3rd boat. The 5 guys survived because they were on a bigger boat and had a big enough lifeboat that they survived in. And the other 3 and the other 2 went down, but all those boats went down, and they were all because they made the wrong decisions. They're out there, they're 100 miles out, you know, drift fishing for swordfish, and the storm comes up, you know, so okay, the storm comes up, you know, maybe we better pull our nets, you know, but no, we're just going to hang on, you know, I mean, and they got radios to tell, you know, what kind of storm there is and everything. I mean, it's not like we have today with all the satellite views and all that stuff, but still, they had input.
Yeah.
Plus, they should know what they're doing anyways, right? And so they hang there, and there's 3 different boats talking to each other, you know? And then all of a sudden, well, shit, we're not going to be able to pull our nets because it's blowing too hard and we can't pull them up. So
They just try to stick it out.
yeah, but you tie a buoy onto your nets and you remember where you are. I mean, we had, you know, navigation by radio transmission and stuff like that. And you turn around and go as slow as you can and get pushed by the storm south, you know, whatever it's doing. And anyways, every time it, you know, to make a decision, they didn't. They stayed there because they were worried they were going to lose their nets. What if the current changes and we come back? What if we can't find them? The current changes and bunches them up and they sink, you know. I mean, every decision they made was the wrong one.
Yeah.
And they all perished out there. So you gotta survive somehow. And yeah, I've made mistakes that have, you know, run me broke before, but
They didn't kill you.
you try not to make the same mistake more than once, too.
What else? What didn't I ask you that you want to talk about?
I don't know.
Yeah. All right, we can call it there. I really appreciate you sitting down with me. It was a good conversation. I feel like I learned a lot. Yeah, and
I definitely can see a lot of you in the way I feel about stuff. Though. So it's
that's
been
reassuring
enjoyable.
At least.
I know it's been enjoyable from this side.
Cool. Yeah. Well, let's go surfing sometime.
And don't be afraid of failures. You know, you learn from them, and like I say, try not to make the same mistake too many times in a row.
All right, guys, we did it. Had a really good conversation with Larry, and you know, if you're listening to this podcast, I think you should probably go over and at least watch a couple of minutes of the video, because Larry has a fantastic mustache, and you know, that's worth checking out. Really inspiring dude. It's cool to hear about his failures, honestly, for me, as much as anything else, because for such a guy that's you know, made a lot of money, frankly, but also is a legend in this skateboarding industry. It's really cool to hear about the failures of these people that you look up to, because it's good to remember that you have to work hard and you have to take risks, and sometimes shit is going to go wrong. Anyway, I appreciate you listening to this episode if you've made it that far, and we'll see you next Tuesday for another episode of From the Van.